Week 1 of the NFL preseason in the books, and we saw some big performances from the XFL and the USFL players. XFL Newsroom and USFL Newsroom writer Nick Thorne joins me to talk about all the hits and misses and the chances that an alt football quarterback gets an NFL roster spot. All right, let's bring in Nick Thorne here, XFL Newsroom, USFL Newsroom. Nick, two good articles on the sites recently, and you talked about your top 5 picks for the XFL and USFL players who have these NFL opportunities, who have a really good chance to make NFL rosters. It's interesting that your 2 top picks from each league were quarterbacks. Now, we're going to talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
But with the first week of the NFL preseason out of the way here, who were some of the standout performances that you saw in that week 1 that maybe that you expected and maybe didn't expect?
Yeah, there was a few people that I was like, okay, I expect it, but it was mostly surprising players, like guys who I really wasn't expecting much of. The one from the USFL that I think has really stood out above everyone else is Austin Watkins, receiver. He was with the Birmingham Stallions and then signed with the Browns. And he's a weird story because he was with Birmingham, had a 60-yard touchdown week 1, and then I guess got in the doghouse or something because he didn't play for most of the season, and it wasn't like an injury thing. He was just inactive. But he got an opportunity with the Browns to try out. They liked what they saw. I mean, he's big, fast, so I guess there were some traits they liked, and he's come in and he's looked good. In the Hall of Fame game, he had really limited playing time, had 2 catches, 35 yards and a touchdown, which, got posted everywhere on Twitter. But I was a little bit more hesitant than everyone else because I was like, well, he got mop up duty late 4th quarter, only 2 targets. But the thing this week was it's clear that they were impressed because his routes run and his snaps played tripled. It was earlier in the game and he made the most of it. He had 6 catches for 71 yards. And I see an opening for him. It's going to be tough. It'll be receiver 6. There's about 5 locks on that team. And then you're talking Jakeem Grant is good on special teams. Anthony Schwartz also is kind of a bubble guy. He's been there for a bunch of years, hasn't really broken out. But he's one that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. If he can have a couple more good games, I totally think at least at practice squad, he might be able to even sneak on the 53. And then my top guy for the XFL is Bruce Hector, defensive lineman. He was with the Renegades and then signed with the Jets. And he was very interesting because he wasn't in the Hall of Fame game with the Jets. He signed in last week, and he came in and balled out. He played 30 snaps, which is a lot for a guy who just got there. And all of his PFF grades were really good, 90-plus grade total for defense and for pass rushing too. And he had the big play where he had a strip sack and recovered his own fumble. He's a guy who, I don't know if he's really going to get a fair shot at making the roster, but he certainly put himself in that conversation more than I expected out of him. He was even he was kind of a rotational guy. I don't think he was a starter for Arlington. He certainly was someone who I wasn't putting on the radar as a big XFL to NFL guy, but those would be probably the 2 more than anyone else that I think really surprised me in this week 1.
Yeah, give a little love to the linemen, man. They got to get in there too. And it feels like that we've seen so many linemen, offensive linemen and defensive linemen who might have a shot from XFL and USFL into the NFL. But of course, everyone talks about quarterbacks, Nick, and I think Alex Magoo is one of the best stories from the USFL. Anyone who's kind of followed his path where he was a starter, then benched, and then he came back and he won the championship when the starter and Jamar Smith went out. I mean, people know his story. It was interesting that he went to Green Bay, signed by the Packers, and I really thought that he has a really good shot of being the number 2 there. But it felt like in that first game, at least against the Bengals, they're really trying to push out Sean Clifford, who to me was kind of a surprise draft pick anyway. Alex Magoo, you talked about some mop-up duty. He got in there and just a little bit. Didn't look great. Did have a handoff. I think the running back went 80 yards for a touchdown. But you feel like, is it, I know we overreact after every game, but after a week one in the NFL preseason, you feel like Magoo is on the bubble. Can he be a number 3? How do you feel like he fits in there with the Packers after week one of the preseason?
Well, I was really bullish on Magoo coming into the preseason. They cut Danny Etling, who was their other kind of bubble quarterback, and it to me was a sign that was like, oh, they're going to give Magoo a legit shot. They got the other guy out of there that they weren't interested in, and I thought like that meant like they were really going to do a competition between Clifford and Magoo for that two spot behind Love. But I mean, like when the way they split the snaps, I'm gonna need to see it a little bit first. It like obviously the fumble really hurt. He didn't play well. He didn't really get much of an opportunity. I think it was only like maybe 7 snaps. And the fumble on top of that was like real rough. But we'll see. I think at this point, like he's definitely a guy who I'm pumping the brakes on a lot because it'd be one thing if he played poorly, but the fact that he didn't play at all really that really shows you where they view that room, that they really want to get Clifford as many snaps as they can, and they really don't care to see Magoo that much. Maybe that was just week one, and then next week Magoo's going to get a ton of snaps. So I'm not in panic mode, but it's certainly a guy who all of a sudden went from like this, oh, he's a sure thing making that roster. Now it's like, maybe he's making the 53 with the new 3 quarterback rule. Maybe he's a practice squad guy. Maybe they just go with 2 guys. I'm not there's nothing guaranteed for Magoo at this point after week one.
Yeah, I was the same way. I mean, I thought his stock was high and going in, especially, and you mentioned the Etling cut, and I thought, well, there we go.
Yeah.
Nick, you talked about that 3 quarterback rule. Sean Payton loves to have 3 quarterbacks on his roster.
Yeah.
Seems like that might play pretty well for Ben Denucci now, who is in Denver, a backup to Russell Wilson. I think he played 3rd string up behind Jarrett Stidham. Well, in week one, but I really like his chances. And, if Saturday's performance against Arizona is any indication, I think he has a real shot to make that Broncos roster.
Yeah, it's kind of like the anti-Magoo there, where both these guys came in, and I viewed them very similarly as like guys who were QB3s, and I was more high on Magoo coming in than Denucci because I thought Stidham got a payday. He's QB2. Like I don't think he can really get above QB3. Best case scenario, he makes that roster as QB3. But right now, I'm like, it's not like still Stidham is the 2. But Stidham did not play well through 2 quarters. Now, to be fair, I saw a stat that was like quarterbacks pressured, and the number 1 quarterback through the first preseason week that was pressured was Russell Wilson, and number 3 was Stidham, and then Denucci was like 48 or something. Like he was like, he was like one of the least pressured quarterbacks in week 1. So maybe that had something to do with it. The Broncos starters and I guess 2nd string just weren't great at keeping them protected, but Denucci looked good. He was doing some classic Denucci things where he was like running up to the line and just kind of shoving the ball to Bandy on a play or 2. But he had a good command of the offense. I definitely think, I mean, at this point, if he can continue at least at this level, I think they are forced to keep him on the 53, but I wouldn't rule out potential him upsetting Stidham as the backup in Denver, and with how Wilson played last year, that could be enough to get on the field this year if that continues.
And that offensive line sucks. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, Russell Wilson was just getting killed out there, and then But you're right, and you're a guy who watches PFF, and you take those numbers into account as you mentioned the stats there, and if you look at it, Ben Denucci actually graded out better than Jarrett Stidham, but numbers don't lie. He wasn't pressured as much as you said.
Yeah, definitely.
And finally here, we're going to talk about you've got an article in the works here as you kind of follow this along. You're a player personnel follower.
Yeah.
You've got the charts. You follow PFF. You watch these guys. You've got everything. you're already starting to look at stock up and stock down right now.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to publish that here pretty soon. What are some of the stock up and stock downs that you can share with us right now?
Well, the stock down guys are really interesting because it's a lot of guys that were in those articles for top 5 opportunities.
What a difference a week makes, right?
Yeah, really. Because it's like you go in and you look at, on the depth chart, it's like, okay, well, this player, I don't think very highly of, and then all of a sudden that player gets a ton of snaps. Of players in that kind of category, I'd say Hakeem Butler is one that I'm definitely stocked down on. He, if you looked on Twitter, there was a lot of Hakeem Butler hate because he had a really bad drop in the fourth quarter, and he didn't play much in the fourth quarter at all either. The Steelers started their starters, so I'm not like the world's on fire. And also one point that I haven't made yet that is interesting because I did this last year and I posted it to Reddit. Now I'm posting on Newsroom, but last year there were cut downs between the preseason games. Like at this point, 5 guys were getting cut, but now I think the stock down guys, I'm less panicked than I was last year because it's like I know most of these guys are going to get 2 more opportunities, and even if they're not great opportunities, like Butler's going to play again next week, and if he has a good game, then he could be a stock up guy. But he's definitely one that you looked at and was like, okay, I wish he played a little bit better if he had limited time. And then on the USFL side, we already mentioned Magoo. He's going to be on that. Jay Sternberg's another one that I was pretty disappointed by. Didn't play much, graded out poorly. He had 1 catch and then he fumbled on it. So it was like, that. Now, none of the other Buffalo tight ends played well either. So there's a few guys that I'm like, oh, well, they played poorly. But then I look at everyone else in the room and I'm like, they could still make that roster. Like they haven't really lost that, any headway because other guys are playing poor too. But, in the NFL, that just means that they go out and they look for other guys outside the room. So I'm not, I can't stay neutral on that. Micah Abernathy's another one that he's actually getting outperformed by guys. Luka Dennis, who's an XFL guy who signed this week or signed this offseason. And they have a 7th round pick, Hellmans, who also graded out well. I got my cat coming in the frame.
It's a cameo.
Yeah. But it feels like he was the main guy there. And then all of a sudden now it feels like other people have kind of caught up to him. But if we're going to speak positively, there's a lot of guys that looked good in week 1 too. Levi Bell is one that I was very high on in the USFL. I felt like he was instant difference maker in Michigan. Kind of was a really good 2 there with, they had Speaks who was, doing, leading the league in sacks, but Bell was quietly because he didn't, he wasn't there the whole season. He was putting up a lot of great stats at the end of the year. He was getting a lot of sacks, a lot of pressure. He was with Seattle. He played on Thursday, and he just was constantly getting in the backfield. He wasn't terribly great at run defense, but 85.8 total defensive grade, 81.9 for pass rush. He had 2 hurries, 2 hits, a sack, 21 rushes. That's going to get it done. And he's a guy who's, I feel like, has a lot of developmental, first off, he's a rookie. He literally came in 2023 class, but he has a lot of potential because he was an inside guy in college. He was a D tackle. And it's clear he's got a weird frame where he's like 6'1", like 275. So they're deciding to make him an outside linebacker and I guess probably lose some weight and be a little bit more athletic. But he looked good. He actually got a tackle on a kickoff, which was crazy because at that size, like you wouldn't even think about putting someone out there at that size, but he got a tackle. So, clearly he can do it all. He's a guy I feel really good about. Maurice Alexander is another one that, he had the big punt return. So, I can't go without that, even if receiving wise, he was just fine. And he might be a guy who doesn't make it in Detroit, but someone else is like, oh, he can be a kick punt returner if there's another team that needs one. I don't know if he's making the Lions. They just signed Khalif Raymond, so who's their returner guy. But let's see, is there anyone else? Jack Snyder's another one that I really liked. He's the XFL. He was with the Roughnecks. He was with the Vikings, played kind of late in the game,
right?
But his stats in the preseason were like almost identical to the XFL grades, where he was like always one of the best pass blockers, and then just kind of like decent at run blocking, and he showed that again. But graded out like really well in all kind of those facets. So he's a guy who he's kind of like Watkins, where I'm interested to see if they give him a little bit earlier and more snaps. There's a bunch of guys like that where like I feel like a lot of players either had a lot of snaps and were like okay, or they had a little bit of snaps and played really well in like 10 snaps, and I'm like, I can't do too much off of that, but clearly he could get a better opportunity in week 2, maybe be a stock up or stock down guy. So
yeah, I think week 2 is probably going to, it might speak to a little bit more and what these guys can do, and we'll kind of probably learn a little bit more about the opportunities that we feel like that they're going to have. I thought what Detroit Lions head coach Dan Campbell said was true, and he talked about how important these leagues like the XFL and USFL are to the NFL now, because we've had, as we talk now, 50 signings from the XFL, 30 or more, or around 30 from the USFL. So I think you've got a lot to choose from stock up and stock down and top fives and those kinds of things.
Yeah. I think I want to say we're at like 85 or 86 Monday nights when we're filming this. We had a ton of signings today. The Lions signed Alex Millette, another offensive lineman. So, it's I think because that the fact that they're staying at 90, it's going to keep rolling. Where maybe in other years it would have stopped now because teams are starting downsize. Now that like if a player gets injured, then they get waived and put on IR, and then a spot's open, and then it seems like a lot of teams are going after USFL and XFL guys because they played this year and they know they're in game shape. So, it's those numbers have exploded over the last 2 weeks. I've been really impressed by that.
Yeah, it's it could be more to come. I mean, we got 3 weeks of the preseason, and they've got camp bodies that they need. They're going to have there'll be injuries during the season, and now it just feels like the NFL is kind of bought into this XFL and USFL deal, which I think they should have. And as you know, you follow it quite a bit and you dive into it. Nick Thorne writes for the XFL newsroom and USFL newsroom. Where can they find you on Twitter? Because it sounds like you're a Twitter guy.
Yeah, I'm not super active. I'm certainly on Twitter a lot.
All right. I get it.
But if you want to reach me, it's at Thornbush 2002. I'll probably just be retweeting my the articles that I write. So if you want to find those, you could probably find them there once they're posted. Hopefully that'll be in the next couple days. But yeah, that's about it.
All right, Nick, I appreciate you joining me. It's going to be a fun preseason here, and hopefully we can see a lot of these guys playing on week 1 in September. Thanks, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.